How to replace the display panel or touchscreen assembly.
Caution: observe all precautions when removing and replacing components. Before you begin, remove the battery, both service doors, hard disk or solid-state drive, optical drive, keyboard, and top cover. Note: the removal and replacement procedures are the same for both the touchscreen assembly and for the non-touch display panel assembly. The procedures shown here are on a non-touch display panel assembly. Removal: carefully disconnect the wireless antenna cables from the wireless LAN and M.2 wireless WAN modules. Caution: use care when disconnecting the wireless antenna cables from the wireless modules. Damaged cables or connectors can degrade notebook performance. Note: take note of the routing path of the wireless antenna cables for later replacement. Lift all of the antenna cables out of the routing channel in the base enclosure. Turn the notebook right side up and open the display panel. Note: take note of the routing path of the wireless antenna cables for later replacement. Pull the antenna cables through the cutout in the base enclosure. Continue to lift the antenna cables out of the routing channel and around the right hinge on the top side of the base enclosure. Gently lift up on the locking bar on the display panel ZIF connector on the system board, and remove the display panel ribbon cable. Important: use care to prevent damaging the ZIF connector and ribbon cable. Note: on touchscreen models, disconnect a second cable bundled with the display panel ribbon cable. For access, lift the DC-in power connector cable out of its routing channel on top of the display panel cable. Lift the display panel cable out of the routing channel. While supporting the display panel assembly, remove the 3 4mm P1 Phillips head screws, one from the left hinge and 2 from the right hinge, that secure the display panel assembly to the base enclosure. Lift the display panel assembly out of the base enclosure. Replacement: align the display panel hinges over the screw holes in the base enclosure. Replace the 3 P1 Phillips head screws to secure the display panel assembly to the base enclosure, 2 in the right hinge and 1 in the left hinge. Tuck the display panel cable into its routing channel in the base enclosure. Insert the display panel ribbon cable into the ZIF connector on the system board, and gently press down on the ZIF connector locking bar. Important: use care to prevent damaging the ZIF connector and ribbon cable. Note: on touchscreen models, connect a second cable bundled with the display panel ribbon cable. Tuck the DC-in power connector cable into its routing channel on top of the display panel cable. Route the antenna cables around the right hinge and into the routing channel on the top side of the base enclosure. Carefully insert all of the antenna cables through the hole in the base enclosure. Close the display panel and turn the notebook upside down. Continue to route the antenna cables into the routing channel in the base enclosure. Reconnect the wireless antenna cables to the wireless LAN and wireless WAN modules. Important: connect the wireless LAN antenna labeled 1 to terminal 1 and antenna labeled 2 to terminal 2. Important: connect wireless WAN antenna labeled 5 to the main terminal and antenna labeled 6 to aux or auxiliary terminal. Caution: use care when connecting the wireless antenna cables to the wireless LAN and wireless WAN modules. Damaged cables or connectors can degrade notebook performance. Continue the reassembly. Replace the top cover, keyboard, optical drive, hard disk or solid-state drive, both service doors, and battery.
How to replace the display panel hinges.
Caution: observe all precautions when removing and replacing components. Before you begin, remove the battery, both service doors, hard disk or solid-state drive, optical drive, keyboard, top cover, display panel assembly, and display panel bezel. Removal. Remove the 6 4mm P1 Phillips head screws that secure the display panel hinges to the display enclosure. Note: take note of how the wireless antenna cables are routed under the right hinge, and the display panel cable is routed around the left hinge for later replacement. Carefully lift the display panel hinge up by its base and pull the top bracket out from under its guide tab in the top of the display enclosure. Remove the display panel hinges. Replacement. Tow the top of each display panel hinge bracket in under the guide tab in the top of the display enclosure. Tuck the display panel cable and wireless antenna cables into their routing paths under the hinge bases about to be replaced. Lower the display panel hinge base down over the alignment pins and screw holes in the display enclosure. Replace the 6 4mm P1 Phillips head screws to secure the display panel hinges to the display enclosure. Continue the reassembly. Replace the display panel bezel, display panel assembly, top cover, keyboard, optical drive, hard disk or solid-state drive, both service doors, and battery.
How to replace the display panel cable.
Caution: observe all precautions when removing and replacing components. Before you begin, remove the battery, both service doors, hard disk or solid-state drive, optical drive, keyboard, top cover, display panel assembly, display panel bezel, left display panel hinge, and display panel. Removal. Carefully pry up the webcam microphone module from the display enclosure just enough to access the back of the webcam microphone module. Peel up the tape over the display panel cable connector that is wrapped around the back of the webcam microphone module. Disconnect the display panel cable from the webcam microphone module. Peel up the display panel cable from the display enclosure. Lift the display panel cable out of its routing channel under the left display panel hinge. Remove the entire display panel cable from the display enclosure. Replacement. Route the display panel cable into the routing channel under the left display panel hinge. Connect the display panel cable to the webcam microphone module. Reapply the tape from the display panel cable over the connector and around to the back of the webcam microphone module. Press the webcam microphone module back into place over the 2 alignment pins. With the display panel cable appropriately laid out. Gently press to adhere the entire display panel cable to the display enclosure. Continue the reassembly. Replace the display panel, left display panel hinge, display panel bezel, display panel assembly, top cover, keyboard, optical drive, hard disk or solid-state drive, both service doors, and battery.
How to replace the display enclosure with wireless antennas.
Caution: observe all precautions when removing and replacing components. Before you begin, remove the battery, both service doors, hard disk or solid-state drive, optical drive, keyboard, top cover, display panel assembly, display panel bezel, webcam microphone module, display panel hinges, display panel, and display panel cable. Removal. Once all of the before you begin components are removed, what is left is the display enclosure, also called the back cover, and the wireless antennas. The wireless antennas are not removed from the display enclosure. Replacement. Replace all of the components removed earlier.